There was a time when people looked forward to the future. In the early 1960s, the jet engine expanded travel for many people around the world. And with the US space program in its infancy, there seemed to be no limits. The TWA terminal at JFK by Eero Saarinen, completed in 1962, exemplifies that spirit. Walking through the restored terminal, which is now the lobby of the TWA Hotel, one can recapture that future feeling, but this time nostalgically. The restoration is magnificent. It is both bold and respectful. But the terminal is no longer a functioning gateway to the world. Rather, it's more of a Disney Vegas themed hotel. You know, the staff is even in period costumes dressed as stewardesses and pilots, and there are all sorts of interesting details such as rotary payphones. So if you wanted to, you could go and relive some sort of cosplay Mad Men experience. But you have to remember that unlike the 1960s, no smoking is allowed. For me, it was a walk down memory lane. I'm old enough to remember travel in the 60s because we would see my father off on his trips. And he always wore his business suit because everybody wore their Sunday best. And we were able to walk all the way with him to the gate and watch the plane push away from the gangway. On board, I'm told, there were smiling attendants, there was food, there was drink. It was a real party in the sky. This truly was the jet set. Saarinen was a great architect who predates a lot of today's branded stylist architects. His buildings were thoughtful, bold, and different because all the settings and the purposes were different. Bubble buildings today are a lot more common simply because computers aid us in drafting, 3D modeling, and even the fabrication of panels, so that nearly any whim can be manufactured. Buildings are often built today not because they're better buildings, but simply because they can be. And a lot of these buildings tend to hide the structure as some sort of necessary evil in order to serve some form which is part of an idiosyncratic vision. But in the mid-20th century, buildings like the TWA terminal were harder to come by. They had to be handcrafted. So preservation of this building is not just a tribute to the architect, but to all the construction workers who made it possible. The distinctive design of the TWA building was a collaboration between Saarinen and his structural engineers Ammann and Whitney. And so the shape you see is structure and not just some pretend form as it is in the Sydney Opera House or anything by Calatrava. Technically, it's a double cantilever and not a shell structure, but the effect is the same, and the staggered shelves allow light to penetrate from all directions into the terminal. Saarinen saw the terminal as a mobile lounge, and he captured that sense in the curved walkways and the curved stairways. He captured movement frozen in terrazzo and tile. When the TWA building was being built, some modern architects were shifting into a kind of futurism. Modernism is the reduction of a building to its simplest, most essential elements, and it's devoid of history and it's devoid of sentiment. Its beauty is derived from the pure rationalism behind the building elements. However, some think modernism is a bit inhuman. Futurism followed shortly after modernism in the early decades of the 20th century. Futurism, both in art and architecture, was about capturing movement in still form. Nude Descending a Staircase by Duchamp is a very famous example. This is not unlike what happened after the Renaissance. Renaissance art and architecture was very stable, very symmetrical, very solid. Baroque came along and decided to create some movement, some excitement. Consider then the comparison between Michelangelo's David and Bernini's David. Michelangelo's David is standing there solidly looking at something about to happen, whereas Bernini's David is in the middle of slinging the stone at Goliath. Saarinen's building then captures that sense of movement in frozen form. It looks like a bird about to fly. It looks like a seagull, which is very comfortable in the air over vast ocean distances. But things change as quickly as when seagulls get sucked into jet engines. The 1970s were not nearly as optimistic, and airlines faced their biggest challenge. Not gravity, but deregulation. See, there was a time when airline fares were set by federal law based on distances. The idea was to preserve safety, airlines should compete on something other than price. So instead, they competed on the extras they gave you. Fly the friendly skies of United. BOAC takes good care of you. American Airlines, something special in the air. Eastern, the wings of man. Theoretically then, overhead costs such as jet maintenance would be free from budget cuts. Making airlines compete on price in the marketplace opened up the sky to a lot more travelers. No longer was it the jet set doing most of the traveling, but the great unwashed, the middle class. And this allowed airlines to cut fares on their most popular routes, such as coast to coast, but eventually they developed their hub and spoke system that we have today in order to serve many more travelers. But the middle class buys based on price. Remember People Express? And so with lowering airfares and soaring overhead costs, such as jet fuel and jet maintenance, it was a race to the bottom for airline extras. There is still first class and business class for the next generation of jet set, but most of us fly coach. By the mid-1980s, when I flew out of TWA terminal in order to go to Egypt, the terminal had seen better days. Upgrades, in order to make it look more contemporary, actually made it look less modern, as modern is now a specific historic style. And the inefficiencies of operating TWA, both the airline and the terminal, became overwhelming. Perhaps someone figured out it takes longer to say TWA than Trans World Airlines. Regardless, in 2001 it was acquired by American Airlines, and after 9/11 the terminal was shut down. Our concept of airline terminals have changed. They are now 70% security and 30% shopping mall food court chains. Our great buildings often live beyond the purpose for which they were built. To truly save a building from the wrecking ball, then, you have to find a new, viable, economically sustainable purpose. Kudos then to the developers who saw the potential in Saarinen's TWA terminal and brought it back to its former glory. I wish them a lot of success. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture Codex.